good thing to remember. Not the first time I've forgotten. And yeah, so what we're going to do is this week we're going to go through a rewrite of all of the screens that have enabled us to demonstrate and make it simpler for users to integrate time, cost, scope, and quality management into their projects. And then next week, we'll be demonstrating how you can leverage the UniPhi dataset via its REST API REST API to build an application of your own using Claude code. And then the third webinar is going to be a new feature that enables you to translate data from UniPhi into a standard structure for benchmarking purposes. And there'll be more on that in the next few weeks. And then the final one is a summary go live webinar on all the smaller enhancements that are coming into this release. So for this particular webinar, what we're really talking about is the iron triangle, which if an old colleague of mine was on the call, would be laughing quite loudly right now, because back in the day, I was a bit of a anti-iron triangle person, but 20 years later, and you're wise enough a little, I guess. And so what we're looking at here is the fact that when you've got constraints delivering an airport, for example, or Olympic Games or a World Cup Games, it's pretty topical, and you've got stadiums to build and events to prepare for. Time is a fairly considerable immovable object in that instance. And so, a project manager has budget and scope change that they can utilize to actually get that to happen. And so you may see a reduction in the scale of these stadiums, or less quality catering to fit into budget constraints, but everyone has to be ready on that time. And that last bit in the middle is basically where you would center change control around. So, if you're building a bridge, it has to stand up, it can't fall down. So there's a fixed constraint around quality that generally defines itself around the specification, the business case, the benefits that you're looking to realize, whether they be a social, economic, or environmental benefit. So these are sort of four elements of project management, four hard elements that a project manager has to manage. And in this webinar, we're going to look at how UniPhi can assist in integrating those. So traditionally, tools are focused on one of those three, if you have or two, but rarely three, or four even. And so you may have a nice WBS that's scheduled out over time, but it doesn't really have a cost component to it. Similarly, you might have a nice cost plan that you're tracking commitments against, but it doesn't really have a time component to it. And so we're integrating those, matching them up, and making that if something happens that impacts on both of them, your change in one will update the other. So when applying that into a UniPhi context, what we're looking at is UniPhi has these elements called dimensions, and those dimensions are hierarchical. You'll have a portfolio or multiple portfolios, in fact, unlimited portfolios. And UniPhi is a portfolio first system, so you'll always be looking at it from an aggregated or portfolio perspective, and then you'll drill in. So portfolios are made up of projects and activities, and projects are made up of contracts, which have work breakdown structures in them, cost breakdown structures as well, and standard tasks. So as you go further and further down, you get into more and more detail. Coming against those levels of dimensions are facts. And in this particular instance, we're looking at sort of four elements of facts. We've got effort, which you can estimate as a baseline, estimate as a forecast, and have actual come through as a timesheet. You have purchased items, requisitions, and expenses that, again, you'll do the same three elements to. You'll have rates, and in addition to that, you'll have the time element of all of those. That's the fourth component. So using all of those, you'll get cost, you'll get time, phasing of those costs or revenue, and you'll get phasing of that effort, all captured against the dimensions that are above the screen. So now I'm going to jump into the application and show how that actually is played out. And the focus, having done this webinar yesterday for the Asia Pacific region, tweaked it a little bit for this one. The focus of this will be on the integration of time, cost, and scope from a design engineering perspective. Yesterday's one focused on it from an asset owner's perspective. So if you want to see that, that'll be published in the next 24 hours, and you can consume that on our YouTube channel. It'll be communicated through our LinkedIn profile. So if you want to know what's happening on UniPhi, you can follow that. And so, yeah, most of the agenda today will be on that top item. And then the coup de grace, the last element, is how we bring quality into the picture. Is the last item on the agenda. Okay. So when looking at that agenda item there, the main element to recognize is that, UniPhi will be tailored and configured to different types of use cases depending on the user base of that deployment. And most of our user base is in those three categories, with our target user base actually being the asset owners who can onboard the consultants and the engineers and the contractors into the system and own the value chain by using our product as the integrating platform for all elements of project management, not just time, cost, scope, and quality. Okay. Just dropping out of that now. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on the engineering component. And I've just logged into a demo UniPhi deployment called infrastructure. I've landed on the dashboard screen. There's actually 4 reporting platforms in UniPhi. This is one of them, being a Power BI embedded platform that enables you to publish your own dashboards and configure your own reporting requirements. And these can be consumed on demand by clients and by users of the application. Now, I'm actually going to change screens here, but browsing around before the webinar got me on the wrong one. But yes, going across the top of the modules of the application, this is where you access those elements of fact that you're going to capture against. And when I click on these, you'll see that those facts are against a workspace activity project that has a dimension of portfolios and programs that enable you to aggregate and cut and dice. So examples of those are these drop downs here for design, discipline, zone, and project. And what we're looking at here is a whole of project. So the difference between this and other deployments is typically it's a either a program of works deployment or it's a single project that's quite large. So we're talking about normally, anywhere between 200 and 1,000 users using the application to build something significant, like an airport enhancement or a greenfield airport, which are pretty rare, but they happen. New roads, new bridges, new tunnels, new rail lines, new stadiums, new water facilities. Those type of major projects is what we're talking about, where there's a large engineering component through design and then through construction, handling construction questions as they come in. Now, one of the biggest significant impacts UniPhi's had on our design engineering customers is the ability to track earned value, which is the last element of the time, cost, scope conversation. It's like, how are we performing against a baseline? And so typically that's been a challenge because those components are stored in different systems that don't talk to one another. But here we are in a consolidated calculation. We have, you can see on this screen, a cumulative actual, a cumulative planned, and a cumulative earned value in the red. These two indicators, schedule performance and cost performance, indicate the first two elements of UniPhi tracking time and cost. In this instance, we're not doing too well. We should be at 1 if we're performing to baseline, and we need to find out why that is. Now, what has happened in reality with this is the first 30 to 50% of the project, this has been a significant contributor to the performance improvement of these projects that have been using this product, because these CPI and SPI statistics drive conversation, drive course correction, and either rebaselining or communication with the client, variation, change control, or even just an improved performance. And when you're considering you're onboarding between 100 people and 1,000 people, you've got quite a lot of team performing elements that project managers need to manage to get that team to be high performing and optimized along the road. And these metrics enable you to determine where to spend that focus of building that performance or analyzing where a original baseline may have been undercooked, et cetera, et cetera. And so how UniPhi then helps you with that is, if I drill into this package summary here, what we're getting now is at the next level down. So that next dimension. So I looked at the portfolio dimension. I'm now looking at the program dimension. And in the program dimension, I've got work packages that are running, and they have these earned value statistics here, which again is a combination of time and cost against a scope, the scope being these work packages. So actual cost, earned value progress against that, and scheduled costs gives me those two elements of actuals versus and schedule versus performance. They then have their own performance indexes here. And again, remember, one is good. And what we can do is compound these to actually get an estimate at completion, which is an overall forecast. So these two measures here we're looking at, one is a indicative, which is why it's got the little I there, measure. You can see that the indicative is compounding this performance capability to say this is actually going to cost more. And then this is a bottom-up remaining forecast that's coming up to an estimate of completion. Now, typically on projects before UniPhi gets involved, this is what people are reporting. UniPhi will drive this one, and there's your original baseline there. And so you can see on the work package APC, in a traditional sense, they'd actually be saying they might be coming under budget, but they're not. They wouldn't have these statistics, and so they're sort of blinkered, if you like. And really, this is going to be more expensive than the original budget, even though you're saying you're going to be under. When I drill in on this, I'm going one dimension even lower into the activity. So this is more scope element. And so the scope element is being tracked against this WBS. And we have our metrics again. And you can see now we've got one activity that's actually performing quite well and two that isn't. And as you go down the numerous activities that exist across the packages, and you can imagine there's thousands of packages, well, hundreds of packages, thousands of activities on these projects, you can zoom in to focus on where you need to troubleshoot and start to coordinate with performance improvement. And so that's pretty unique, not very common for large-scale projects to get to this level of detail to be able to then make decisions. And not only that, to be able to get to that level of detail within a month of going live on the project and having to stand up a team, onboard people, approve, normally through constraints of client approval with CV workflows and all that sort of stuff, to actually get people onboarded with rates, timesheeting in the system to a WBS, baselined already, resource loaded, bang, there we go. So how do we capture this information so that these reports can actually exist? Let's go over to the summary screen. Now, in the UniPhi setup for an infrastructure project, there's actually two options to set this up. We call them projects as activities. So you can see this is displaying as activities. And the other one we call contract WBS. I'm going to show both, but we're going to start with project as activities. And it gives me an example of how to see UniPhi can cut and dice information. So looking at this screen, I've got all the activities listed down here, and I've got some metadata around them. And I can filter the subset of this information with this pop-up modal filter here. And under the project type, we've set this up to be filtered contract-based WBS versus projects as tasks. And if I go to projects as tasks, what I get is how things are normally set up when it's a massive project rather than a program of works. So typically that's when we use projects as tasks. And what we've got here is those work packages that we were seeing in the other dashboard and the activities that sit underneath them. And if I select this drop down, I get that in a parent-child relationship. So that's the package, that's the program, that's the project of activities for work package MNO, work package XYZ. And so these are the ones we're looking at today. These other elements for construction phase and for doing the commercial management. So we're focused on the project controls in this demonstration, but UniPhi also does the commercial management, the invoicing to the client, the invoicing of sub-consultants into the project or JV partners, the split of profitability and the tracking of all of that, and the EACs from a JV perspective or a collaboration perspective. But we're looking at performance management because we're integrating that time, cost, scope, and quality elements into this. So we're going to start at the time module, makes sense. And what we're seeing here is a portfolio level pipeline of those activities that we've seen in this drop down here. They're being displayed against a life cycle, so that normally, design engineers will take things through a concept and detailed and issued for construction phase, and then in construction they will do construction phase services, handling requests for information from the contractor to respond to. And we're just tracking the timeline again from a portfolio first perspective across those activities. And this is the first element that enables us to derive this and drive it into the way we schedule. And you'll see that come up. Now, often outside of UniPhi, there will be large-scale time schedules being used. We think over time, if our system's used broadly, they may start to be phased out. But at the moment, that's the status quo. And we pull that data in to synchronize that. So again, the goal in this is to be able to synchronize time, cost, and scope. And we know we're not going to be the only source of input for that. And so we've provided interfaces with other systems. So when I go to the external schedule, you'll see that this has got an integration with either Primavera P6 or Microsoft Project. Typically on major infrastructure, it's P6. And you import that data from an XML file that gets extracted from P6. And once you've done that, you're able to synchronize the activities and have their dates and their percent complete inherit from that schedule. So that's one option of getting the progress and the schedule from a low level, more detailed activity list. In our examples, sometimes these go down to 10 levels and have thousands of tasks, a bit over-engineered, but that's the way it is in the industry. And you will map this once, and then every time you upload again, all the dates will then naturally update. And if you've got that linked to your activities, no, it's a manual process for Fabrizio. Thanks, mate. You'll get those dates updated instantly. So with the activity progress milestone, what that will do is make sure you get the percent complete inheriting, and that's how the earned value gets updated. So that's one model that enables you to get dates being synchronized from an external schedule being managed by a third party typically, or a separate team. Quite often there's a scheduling team that will feed this into UniPhi themselves. Or if you're in a construction business, managing a construction business, they will send you a program as well. However, if I was to look at it from a UniPhi perspective, and I just drill into this ABC activity, so now I'm going into specifics here, you'll see that there's a few other sub-navigations that come up here. And in this instance, we're not linking to anything in the schedule. If I go to the schedule, I will have those lifecycle phases that I can phase out. And then I will have milestones. And with the milestones, what we're doing against an activity is we're establishing a series of stage gates that this activity will go through. And often it'll be a collection of deliverables that they need to package up and issue to certain stakeholder groups, drawings and specifications and the like, which will go through a staged review. Now you can create a template for these reviews so that they're standard and they will have a earned value profile that aligns to them. And so what this means is that you can have assess issued for review. Has that been done? Yes. Okay, that's complete, 100%. Now we get 10% of the earned value profile of that project, of that activity, I should say. Issued for approval, etc. Now you design these yourself, but this is just an example, one that's not uncommon of what we see. And this must add up to 100%. And then as you do the progress, you'll have status dating with that progress going from 15 to 100 of that 10% for this particular collection of deliverables that need to be managed out to get the design to progress. So that can actually be happened in UniPhi independent of an external schedule. And what it enables you to do is to use the resource role allocation to distribute that activity to the people who are responsible for that particular activity to update it. So now what you're getting is out of that 600 people, you may have 50 to 60 people as design leads, design managers, project controls people coming into the system and updating this information so that that dashboard that I showed at the beginning is being updated for the project directors and the senior leaders to be able to start to troubleshoot, design managers as well, troubleshoot and have those conversations. So this is another way to do it. However, if we're getting it from the schedule, what will happen is, we're going into the wrong one. I forgot which one it is. One of these has it. There we go. It'll just have an activity progress here, and you're not manually updating that. This is coming from the external schedule. And so that activity for activity 2 for XYZ is getting its progress, 15%. And again, there will be a trend line. Every time you've updated that, the status date will update automatically from the XML file. The percent complete will update automatically from that, as will the baseline and actual forecast dates. So we're going to come back to this with the coup de grace at the end of the session to show how the quality element will come in to this particular activity. All right, so what that enables us to do and what that's done for us is to track progress, but it can only do that if we've got a baseline and if we're then getting actuals coming in as well. So with most of these projects, what I'm going to demonstrate in this is the time element, the effort element of this data capture. If you watch the webinar from yesterday, you'll be able to see how you can also capture the expense or the purchasing elements of that profile. They come from the costs and the contracts module. But for this particular setup, remember, we're looking at projects as tasks. We will manage the effort against these activities in the resources module. And this is all new written interface for the UniPhi 22 release. So when I go to resources, there'll be a resource planning sub-navigation against this activity. And I'm just going to jump up to a different one because it has better data. So just pausing for breath here on this particular screen, what you can see from this chart, which is quite a nice visual, is the data we're capturing at this particular activity. The blue here is the baseline that's been approved. You can have many baselines and you have many scenario options. The green is the timesheeted actuals and the red is the remaining work. So that's the data that's been captured in this screen. Excuse me, how it's been captured is in this interface here. Now, these are all new updated interfaces. So the old methods we won't go into, but you could capture this information, but these are much better interfaces to do analysis and get that update as accurate as possible and set it up to handle being updated over time when time changes. So having a look at this screen for a moment, we're looking at the all phase view. I'm just going to change that to the actual forecast. The all phase view gave me the opportunity to show this chart with having all of the time series. We're going to look at the actual forecast time series. And what this shows me is timesheet actuals up to the 28th of June. So that's why the green line finishes there. And then forecast from then on. And we're looking at the screen from the 5th of July. Now, we have all of this happening automatically being phased out. And if you synchronize these dates that we've got for this phasing from your life cycle phases, then this will, when you change the life cycle dates, which again could come from an external schedule, it'll then cascade into all these different activities, not just this one, and push out and rephase the hours. Now, what this screen is also doing for you is helping you estimate what is remaining. And it's done either by a classification that you define or by people allocated to the job. And what tends to happen is in the beginning of the job, it'll be done by classification because you don't know who's going to work on it. And we've just done the submission and finalized it, and we're baselining it off that submission, which is against classification. And then what we will do is we will reallocate these hours to people. And so when I go to reallocate, I can spread that classification out over the people that are going to work on it, and they will then inherit those hours. And so as we're well into this job now, most of the reallocation is done at and the estimating is done at the person. We have a whole bunch of value-based estimating tools in this screen, under this value screen, and we have even more information than what's in here. So if I wanted to see that information, I can click this little column icon, and it gives me additional columns that I can add into this screen when the person starts and end, because not much point scheduling a person before they start and not much point scheduling them after they end. How much the actuals are to date, what's the phase forecast, etc., are not being shown in the screen. I can increase the number of weeks displayed in the screen, etc. And if I've got too much information here and I'm not using it, I can move it. And if I've got it for different purposes, then what I can do is I can create views. And so this icon here creates a view. And when I create a view, I set up a bunch of different columns for that view. And so that's what I've done here. And then I'll have a view drop down that I can pivot between one view and the other to have different ways of looking at the data. The next icon that you see there is the camera icon to create a snapshot. And so if I was to pivot this now to budget, there'll be a couple of extra drop downs come in. One of it being the snapshot version. So if I turn the charts back on, what this enables me to see is that I've got the current snapshot, the current budget version, and I've got a baseline budget version, which is the one that we're reporting on in our charts that we had at the beginning of the session. and I can compare the two. And so I can see one scenario versus another. So we've actually reduced the number of hours slightly since our original approved by about 200. You can see the totals at the end there. 300 actually, 300,000 hours. There's a lot of hours booked into this. And so that interface helps you analyze that. And you just change the phase view to see that. If you wanted to, and you're reforecasting in the forecast view, you can also re-baseline. So when I go into this view, what I can do is I can tick all of my resources here and re-baseline. And so what that will do is copy everything that's in the actual and forecast screen and put it down into the budget screen. And then I can, when I snapshot the budget, one of my options is to mark it as the approved. So that will become the approved budget. So I've basically re-baselined through that process. Now looking at these value screens, what we've got here, excuse me, is, as I mentioned, people. And as we're only phasing by people at the moment, we can just focus on those. So I'm just going to remove the classification here. And then I've got some information telling me how much availability these people have, who's full-time, who's part-time. And then I can either do hours per week or percent allocation to determine the total number of remaining hours. So if I know Bernard's actually 50% allocated to this job now, I change that to 50%. And so that gives him 10 hours a week, which is 262 hours over the 26-week duration. If I was to change the duration here and say only 13 weeks, then his schedule changes from starting on the 30th of June to finish on the 28th of September. And then saving that with the green icon here adjusts the phase data for Bernard. And so that 8 and 10 timeline is now finishing in September, where it would have been finishing in December. So person by person, again, a design lead managing their portfolio, their particular group of people, updating this information gives us that reforecasted bottom-up estimate. Remember, progress is coming from the time module that we were showing before. And then rate information, you'll see rates being allocated to people. Rate information can then be seen through changing the unit of measure here. So if I wanted to see the cost component of that, I select cost. This is now showing me that cost. I can compare that to baseline. And these are the individual costs as well. And so all of that is being rolled up into the total cost of the activity, as you can see down the bottom here, over time, but also as a total. And that's what's being displayed as the actual cost of work performed in the dashboard from the beginning of the session. So what we've got in this particular screen is the updating of the actual cost of work performed, which is the cost metric, the budgeted cost of work scheduled, which is the baseline metric when I snapshot the baseline. And then the performance metric is coming from a combination of that baseline and how much we've progressed from the time dashboard. And that then leads us back to the original dashboard performance that we had at the start of the session. So changing those elements dynamically updates all three elements of time, cost, and schedule. If you add more activities in, you're increasing cost. If you baseline that, you're rebaselining against that schedule. If you don't, then there'll always be an actual cost of work performed at the project level that's higher, possibly, unless you're reducing elsewhere, but you'll be able to see that at the work package scope level to see where those changes are taking place. And that's all being then integrated into this view. Now, the same outputs are possible through a contracted methodology. So I'm not going to harp on this one. It's the same interfaces. It's just typically used when you're doing a program of works, when you're getting work orders over time, you're managing a client who's rolling out piecemeal work rather than a fixed scope upfront. We need to build a new airport. This would be where we're doing technical advice on random, say, railway possible works, and you're doing exploratory feasibility right through to construction. And so that we recommend setting that up as if you're running a mini business, or this is also how an enterprise resource planning deployment would work for clients who are consultants full-time. And in this scenario, what happens is you have these contracts in the contracts module. And when you drill into that, they have the ability to create a work breakdown structure that you can set up as a quoting mechanism. So when I go into the quote here, you'll see that we have an architectural design maintenance facility building we're quoting for. We've got deliverable collections here, just like we had in the activity-based, project-based methodology. We have both classification and hours, and this is how we generate a value for the contract of 1.14. We've gone down into the activities and we've estimated that up. Now in UniPhi 22, we enhance that even further. Once you've created your structure, you don't necessarily have to create the hours here. You would just create the WBS structure, which is a two-level structure here. And then when I go to the schedule screen, which is brand new, upgraded, existed before, but totally rewritten, I've got similar screens that I had in the resource planning view, a very similar updating screen here. And then what I would do is, as I estimate against the people and the classifications again, and I'm happy with that, you'll see here that the contract hours and the total hours are the same. If I was to go into add Joe Bloggs into this activity and say he was going to do 500 hours, I would then save that. And then I could see here that there's a total hours there. There's no contract hours. If I'd done this before all the contract hours existed, I would then tick this little box again and go copy to value. And when I copy to value, the 50 hours I've allocated to Joe Bloggs, the 25 there, and the 50 here, wherever it's gone, would then go into the contract, and the contract value would go up. Obviously, I could only do that if I was quoting or if I was doing it as a variation, and I have to get approval for the client to have that happen. But that's the way the value of the contract would change. Then when I do that, I've also got all of the functionality that we had before with regards to linking. At the moment here, I'm looking at, this is new in the contract system because I've got the tasks, I can actually create dependencies. So if this particular activity, WBS activity 2, had to happen after ABC collection, I can say it's going to be a finish to start relationship to that activity. So if I go ABC collection and the relationship is a finish to start, you'll see that the start date is now finishing after the 16th of May. And then if I was to add a duration into this column or manually select the start date here, a couple of months later, it's now created that relationship. In that way, if I was to then link ABC collection to a life cycle phase, which is missing here, so I need to add it in. I could then link the commencing task to the commencement of a life cycle phase, which would be the concept design phase, and it's going to then cascade down to the ABC collection, etc. So again, pushing that out to, I think so. And so once I've got that set up, I need to update that a bit. Any change I make to the life cycle will cascade down into these other activities. So going back to where we started on the time dashboard, I can amend from a external schedule a date that will knock on effect to the concept design, which will knock on effect to the delivery of WBS activity 2. And because we've got automated phasing on, as soon as I hit save, all of those hours are being pushed out. I would baseline that using the snapshot element again. And once I've got my charts on and view all, I'm getting the same sort of visual comparisons of actuals, forecast, and time. So whether you're doing it in the contracts WBS, whether you're doing it in a project WBS, we're integrating those elements so that a change in one affects the change in the other. We're not having to manage things in multiple locations. We're synchronizing time versus cost. Again, I can convert these to cost and revenue because these classifications and people have rates. And so we've integrated all of that into one common workflow. All right, so the only thing left out of that is, and you'll see when you're doing contract, actually, you'll also track your own value in the contract rather than, well, you can still do it in time, but at a more granular level in the own value of the contract itself. So that's pretty much the whole of the engineering element. The asset owner element looks at the cost and revenue components of that and phasing cost and revenue rather than people's time. Obviously, actual time is coming from the timesheets module, but that's old school, been there forever. Now what I'm going to do is just do the coup de grace that I mentioned, which is how does quality fit into this? And the quality element comes from the issues management. So if you're looking at, say, an early warning type relationship in a contract, and you've got a problem arises that you weren't aware of, it gets raised. You have to analyze the impact of that. The impact could be a time delay. It could be a cost increase. That process needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed around that quality specification. Do we spend more money to get it done on time so the Olympics can happen? Is there another design change we can do, a change to scope that would actually make this still fit within the time frame? What can we do about this issue? And so by having issues managed in UniPhi and having them linked to schedule and cost, you can link quality into the conversation of time, cost, and scope. To demonstrate that, the first thing I'm going to do is show you our Outlook integration. So if you're using Microsoft Outlook, you'll be able to add the Save to UniPhi button into your Outlook. And so when you get an email that is an issue on a job, this isn't the only way you can get an issue in the system, obviously. I'm just showing you how you can get it from email. You will then log this into the UniPhi application. I'm going to log it as a new issue. I'm going to put it against, I think it's this one that I want to put it against. And you can classify that issue with your own listing. And you can see already we've got element of time, cost, and scope coming in here. And then assign it to someone and hit save, and you're done. But of course, the issue isn't resolved. You can keep working in your email if you want to, or you can click on the link and it'll take you into the infrastructure project. There's our email. This is an issue logged in the issue module against that activity. Now, I need to manage that out. I can add actions here that I can assign to someone else and set a due date. And so when I set this due date, I'm not going to get a due date over here. And as I add more actions, if they were later dates, that due date's going to update. And as I start to resolve this out, there's two things I can do to integrate it to the time and to the cost. The first one integrates the time. I can link this to that activity progress. Now, before I do, I just want to go into that, remind ourselves, get rid of this filter. Remind ourselves of what we were looking at there. So we had an activity progress that was finishing on the 14th of December. So what I want to do is I actually want to say, this is going to be finishing now next year, 15th of January. And then when I link this to the activity progress, it's going to update this milestone to be before January 2027, as you can see there. Now, if I have linked that to a life cycle phase, that life cycle phase is going to push out. And if I've linked that life cycle phase to the contract or to the resource plan, then the resource plan is going to push out. So by changing one date in the issues system, the cascading knock-on effect is to time and cost instantly. And if I am then managing the contracts module and my shiny new road, typically what would happen during that issue is I would have gone to the contractor and to the design team, and they would have to have logged a variation with a price. And that now becomes a pending approval variation, which I can connect the dots on for communication purposes and for understanding and analysis to the issue that drove the variation. So when I come in here, I can click on that, and I'm in shiny new road. I'm in the wrong project. So the issue I logged isn't there, but you can see how we've already logged this particular issue, that one from the previous demonstration with the same email, it's been around for a while, into this scene. So I now have a cost component and a schedule component that's linked to a quality problem that's been raised, in this instance, client change request, which is a common one. And you can see design time to be over budget and obviously longer. So that's the key subsequent deeper dive of factual information rather than just numbers, that you can start from a dashboard telling you what a CPI and SPI index is, and then through a few clicks find an activity that's going off the rails, and then find conversations on issues that have driven that to go off the rails, start to collaborate, drive change, drive resolution, drive progress, drive profitability, drive delivery on time. Everyone's happy. everyone's stressed, but everyone delivers better. Everyone delivers quicker, higher quality to specification. Coup de grace. Okay, that's the main presentation of this webinar. The only thing to finish on is the release timetable for UniPhi. So as I mentioned, next week we've got a separate webinar with all this data. We have a REST API that you can hook into and drive the building of Power BI, but equally now, finally, even better stuff. You can build your own app, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Then we'll do a third webinar on how we reclassify all of this activity into a common structure so that we can benchmark it across projects and look at, different airport projects, different bridges, different tunnels, different water programs. And then we'll do a final summary. The final summary will be launched on the 3rd of August. The knowledge base will be updated with all new features by then. Staging environments will be patched according to a schedule from the 3rd of August that you'll be notified of by an account manager. And then production will be patched at your discretion or 90 days, whichever is the earliest. So you can get patched as soon as you want to production. Otherwise, we will patch everyone after 90 days of their staging environment being patched. So that's how the release timetable is going to work. Thanks for joining the session. That'll be published on our YouTube channel within the next day or so. The ability to register for the other webinars are from our website. If you scroll to the bottom and click webinars, you'll see the region of your choice. There's 3 time zones to join, and hope to see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.